The following is a presentation of the BP8 Podcast Network.
What's up, Wake Forest? This is our second episode of our podcast.
Episode 2, it's like The Empire Strikes Back.
No, that's episode 5.
Well, but it was the second one.
Yeah, but it's episode 5 in the chronology of it.
I get it, but it was the second movie that they released.
I understand, but in the whole saga, it's episode 5.
Okay, fine, I'm going to lose that one.
Okay. So, Brian, last night I did something pretty cool. I opened up my bedroom windows because it was a crisp night.
Right.
It's about 60, 65 degrees maybe.
Right.
So I started thinking about fall.
Okay.
And I love fall. And I know we have a lot of stuff going on in fall in Wake Forest.
We've got a lot of stuff going on this fall in Wake Forest, that's for sure. Best part about it is it's football season.
Oh, God.
So, you got to get into that, right?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that later.
We are?
We have some stuff to talk about.
Okay, so we'll talk about football, and we'll talk about high school football. We'll talk about college football.
Yes. Yeah.
We won't talk about the pros. We'll talk about a lot of the events that we have coming up in town. We're going to talk a little bit about tax base today.
Yes.
I'm going to get into some real estate information. Well, I want to start off, if we can.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a lot of people asking me questions about what happened on Brook Street a couple of weeks ago over by the new
yes.
Stanley Martin Homes townhouses and over the falls and Brook Street Bowl and all of that stuff. So what basically happened...
This is a Coke, not a just Coke.
Yes, exactly. But the what basically happened was the folks that did the excavation and did all the work on prepping the Stanley Martin site left something that was basically a sensor to help them find gas lines when they run metal detectors over the top of it when they're doing repairs. And one of those things just got left. It got buried with the gas lines, and when they were digging to get everything set up, it was a little bit of confusion. So the good news is everything's fixed. There were no problems. Nobody was ever in danger, thank goodness. But there were reports that it might have been a bomb, and luckily it was not. So
Yeah.
Sorry for those folks that had to deal with the evacuation. I know Doug Pierce and his son Greg Pierce that own Brook Street Bowl and Over the Falls Deli, and then Arrow Tree, and then Dave and Susan Lucy over at Page 158 Books. Those all had to be evacuated. And so I want to say thank you to the Wake Forest Police Department. Raleigh Bomb Squad brought in their bomb robot in order to fix everything. It was quite the scene there for a little bit, but luckily no one was hurt. So we had a whole bunch of folks asking about what was going on with that. So I want to get that out of the way first. So
Yes.
I'll strike that one off the list. So we got that one covered.
Okay. So do you want to talk about the events coming up?
Yeah.
So we have
lots of cool things going on.
Yeah, we have one more night of Friday Night White, correct?
That's correct. That's on Friday, September 14th.
And that will feature the band Crush. And for
Correct.
those of you who went to the fireworks show, they were the band that was there, and
That's
they
correct.
were
Crush was the band at the fireworks show. They did a great job.
They
got
crushed
a great
it.
following. They crushed it.
Yes, they
Really,
did.
you went there?
yeah.
You went there?
I mean, they did crush it. I mean, they were pretty good.
Okay. All these puns brought to you by Friday Night on White, by the way.
Yep.
Also, on the 14th is we're going to combine that event with an Art After Hours event in downtown so that people can go visit all of the different shops in downtown Wake Forest. So even shops that don't actually sell art are going to have artists or someone in there working in their locations. So we invite you to check that out too. That's something that the downtown merchants put on, and those will run throughout the off season, or what I call the off season, throughout the fall and the winter months when we can't do Friday Night on White. That typically continues. So I encourage people to attend those. It's always fun. Another big event that we have, and we have quite a few coming up over the next couple of weeks, but the next big event on the calendar is September 11th, and it is the Wake Forest Chamber of Commerce Business Expo that is going to be held over at Richland Creek Community Church.
Okay.
It is a huge event, a ton of local businesses. I think they had over 125 vendors last year. It's sponsored by the good folks at B&W Hardware, your local hardware store downtown. By the way, I want to talk about B&W Hardware real quick, if I may, in the midst of this. I went over there. I try to do local shopping.
Yeah.
And I have found, whenever I have found something that I need, they may not have it in stock, but they are
they'll
able
get it
to
for you,
order it,
yeah.
and it comes in. They've got trucks that deliver on both Tuesday and Thursday. So rather than just going to Lowe's, jumping in, or Home Depot and jumping in and grabbing what you need and walking right back out, a little extra effort can really help to fund a local family-owned business, one that's been around for over 60 years. So I would encourage you with things like that to shop and make sure you find out what's going on. So
Yeah, and for you local high school football fans, I think they're still selling those coolers with the Wake Forest and Heritage logos.
They've got the Wake Forest, and they can put the Heritage and Wake Forest logo on those coolers, and they're pretty cool.
They're really
bought one
strong,
last year.
really strong coolers.
Yeah, and they will keep things cold. We took one up to a weekend trip to an Appalachian State football game last year, and it kept things cold for the whole time. So we still had ice from when we left when we got back, so that was pretty cool. So definitely encourage you to shop there. But they are the grand sponsor of the Wake Forest Chamber Business Expo. Again, thanks to the Chamber of Commerce for doing so much. Ann and Corey and the rest of the crew over there, they do a great job of promoting the businesses here in Wake Forest, and they put this together. This is one of their big projects of the year. And as always, we say thanks to the folks at Richland Creek that the staff over there does such a good job at not only being a community-friendly organization with the church over there, because they've got one of the largest spaces available in Wake Forest for something like this, but the staff over there is so good at
very helpful.
Well, number one, they're very helpful, but number two, the technical staff over there really has the ability with those screens and with their announcements and everything to do a great job of taking things to the next level and raising the bar on events. I know that's kind of cheesy to listen to, but it's definitely one of those statements that certainly applies. Following that, on Tuesday, September 11th, you can go over on Saturday, September 15th to Joyner Park. From 1 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon will be Good Neighbor Day, and it's family-friendly event. Everybody come out, check it out, come join us. There will be music, there will be performances, there will be educational things, and just an opportunity to hang out in the park with lots of friends. We'll also recognize our adult and our youth Good Neighbors of the Year. And if you've got a nomination for either one of those, you can send it into the town. You can go to the town's website at wakeforestnc.gov, and in the search bar, type in Good Neighbor Day, and it'll give you instructions on how to nominate someone for the Good Neighbor of the Year.
Are dogs allowed at this event?
Dogs are allowed at Good Neighbor Day,
On
not
leashes.
unusual at all. There will be food trucks, so you'll have to be careful with them in the food. But of course, keep in mind that with dogs, most dogs, although they may seem to be okay walking through a crowd, most dogs get very stressed around a crowd of people. So probably a better idea to avoid bringing your pets to something that large, like a Good Neighbor Day or a Friday Night on White. It always worries me with
Especially
the dogs
with the
downtown.
musical performances
Especially
too.
with the music and how loud it is. And of course, there are lots of kids around that don't may not understand how to approach a dog properly. Another one that's coming up, and this is coming up on October 1st of this year. October 1st is National Night Out, and that's brought to us by the Wake Forest Police Department. They do a great job with that. It's going to be at the Renaissance Center parking lot down in downtown Wake Forest on the corner of Brooks and Elm, and that'll be from 5 until 7:30 p.m. You'll have the opportunity to meet a lot of the folks that make the town go around, as they say. You'll get to see the police department, members of the police department, the K-9 squad, fire department folks participate in that. EMS participates in it. It's always really a cool event. Again, family friendly. Bring the kids. Come have a great time. But that one's going to be downtown at the Renaissance Center. Again, that is October 1st from 5 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. And then I also want to make sure that I make a mention of the Wake Forest Farmers Market. The Farmers Market is there every Saturday morning in the Taylor Street parking lot behind Town Hall, near the corner of Taylor Street and Elm Street. And that's going on usually from about 7 o'clock in the morning. They're usually there till about 10:30, 11 o'clock. I love going up there. That's where we get our eggs for our family. And they've also got some great honey.
Yes, the honey. I was going to say the honey.
And then I think it's Strong Arm Bakery has this cinnamon cinnamon roll honey bun thing that is just to die for.
That sounds very dangerous.
Yeah, I'm salivating here just talking about it, so I should probably stop. But definitely go check out the Wake Forest Farmers Market. The other folks that you'll always find at the Farmers Market are the guys from the VFW. They're always out there raising money and helping people carry stuff to their cars and things like that. And they all are great people. Of course, we want to recognize our war veterans who have been through so many things just to fight for our freedom. So we say thank you to those, although thank you is probably never enough considering the sacrifices that some of those guys made. Speaking of that, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the passing of John McCain.
Yeah.
John passed last night. Senator McCain was a man that I was fortunate enough on 2 occasions to meet when I was doing some things for the town of Wake Forest up in Washington, D.C. He's a very polite man, very gentlemanly, very stately. He was truly an elder statesman, and our thoughts and prayers go out to his family. And who were you telling me? You just read something.
Yes, it was
Was it Neil Diamond?
Neil Simon,
Neil Simon or Neil
celebrated writer for the stage
Neil
and screen.
Simon passed away. For those of you that are of my area, you'll remember a lot of things that he wrote, not only for movies but for musicals. So, passing of him at age 91.
He wrote The Odd Couple, Barefoot in the Park, Promises, Promises, The Goodbye Girl, and Lost in Yonkers.
There you go. And a lot of those were adapted to plays in addition to screenplays. So, very, very, very sad to hear of that passing. So, certainly remember those folks. What do you want to talk about next?
You have this very large packet.
I have a large book that
With a lot
I'm
of
still
numbers
reading.
Usually scares me away. But
Yeah, this book is basically outlining our bond ratings. We're very excited for the town of Wake Forest to have been rated AAA by both Fitch and Standard & Poor's, which is their highest rating. And then Moody's has ranked us as an AA1, which is their highest rating. So the town of Wake Forest fiscally is in fantastic shape. I know a lot of folks always have their pet projects that they want to make sure get done, and it's truly a balancing act in order to try to do all of those things. One of the first questions that we always get asked about, of course, is how much construction has there been? And I wanted to point these numbers out so that people were aware of it. But in 2016, or let's go back to 2015, and one of the things that I ran on when I ran for office was a more balanced tax base. When you've got a town or a city that has a residential tax base that is 90% of the tax base and only 10% of it is built on commercial business, a lot of the times you look at tax hikes in order to do any work in the town. So if there's a problem with a park, or if there's significant snow removal, or you have to rebuild a pool like we've had to do, unfortunately. When you look at those things, the commercial tax base should bring at least 20 to 25% of the income for the community in order for the town to not be stressed financially. And so in 2015, I ran on a platform to try to increase the percentage of commercial businesses versus the residential tax base, and targeting that 20% to 25% number. So I want to point out a couple of those because I think people will find it interesting. You know, with all the building that's gone on over the last couple of years, I thought we'd actually remove or review some real numbers. So in 2016, there were 99 commercial building permits issued with a property value of $36 million, and I'm rounding these numbers, by the way. And then there were 537 residential units with $88 million of tax value added to the bottom line. So in other words, out of the total of $124 million tax base added, 36 million of it was commercial. So in other words, it was right at that 25% mark. So that's good in 2016. We did the same thing in 2017. If we look at the numbers there, 105 commercial properties with 33 million value added, and 835 residential properties with 128 million added. So if you look at that one, we're 33 million for commercial out of 160 million tax base, just a bit below 20%. So that's a good sign. And then if you look at 2018, and this is basically through April 30th of 2018, based on the town's inspections department, 100 commercial properties being permitted at a value of $58 million versus 1,013 residential properties permitted, and that added 136,000. So again, if you look at the total tax base that's been added this year, it's of 194 million. 58 million of that, or more than 25%, has been done by commercial property, and it's actually closer to 30% when you look at that number. So that's a good sign. We're growing in the right way, and that means that with our budget this year, again, we were able to leave taxes at the same value which they were. And during the same time period, from an economic standpoint, we saw the unemployment rate in Wake Forest. April's unemployment rate, which was the most recent data that we have, was only 3.2%. So that's a really good sign with everything that we've got going on. The other thing I wanted to talk about, people always talking about growth.
Yes.
In 1990, there were 5,800 people that lived in Wake Forest. In 2000, there were 12,588. And in 2010, there were 30,117. So we added 18,000 people over a 10-year period. So that's 150% growth over a 10-year period. That's from 10 years ago. If we look at that again now, the planning department has estimated the population as of May 2018 to be 43,287. So population over 43,000 at this point. People ask us all the time, why do we continue to let people move here? Well, they want to move here for the same reason that you moved here. There's a great small town charm.
Good schools.
It's good schools. There's lots of activities for the entire family. The Greenway attracts people. The atmosphere where we can get to Raleigh in 30 minutes or get to Durham in 35 minutes or get to RDU Airport in 25 minutes is great. People talk about the traffic all the time. And granted, if you're traveling between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m., yeah, traffic's going to be busy. And the same in the afternoon after you pick up the kids from school all the way until about 6 o'clock. But I don't think people would want to spend the tax money that we would have to charge in order to be able to build roads that always held at capacity. I don't think you want to do that. So that's one of the reasons that you don't see DOT building and widening roads as much as they have. Because the problem is if you build a more walkable community and you do things like the Lime bikes that we've recently added, and we're discussing golf carts in the community or low-speed vehicles in the community, you get opportunities like that for people to move through their own neighborhoods. I went to downtown Raleigh last week and actually got on a scooter, one of the rentable scooters, to make my way about a half a mile, 3/4 of a mile down the way a little bit quicker. So you've got opportunities like that. With the downtown expansion and Powerhouse Row coming to downtown, downtown's going to be a lot more walkable. So we don't want to keep building roads and parking lots and things like that. We'd like for people to do that. And that's one of the other arguments. We talked about Friday Night on White earlier. People say, well, gosh, there's not enough parking places. We need a parking deck. Well, if a parking deck made money, a private vendor would have already built one. But it's about $14,000 per space to build a concrete parking deck. And that doesn't include the second and third floors when you're going in there. And then you've got to operate them and make your money back. And it's a very slow return on the investment. So I'm not inclined to, as a steward of the taxpayers' money, I'm not inclined to vote for a parking deck when somebody that's private could come in and do something that was similar. So needless to say, lots of stuff going in the town of Wake Forest. We've got we're going to have quite a few planning items on the docket for the Tuesday, September 4th meeting at 7:30 p.m. We're going to have a couple of neighborhoods that are being discussed and a couple of more developments that are being discussed, and then we'll vote on those on the meeting at 7 p.m. on on Tuesday, September 18th. So you may want to put those dates down if you truly want to see what's going on with the growth in the town.
Yeah.
And of course, you can also, if you live in the town limits and you have Spectrum cable, you can always watch those on Channel 10. They are broadcast live, so you can see exactly what's going on and know exactly what's going on. And of course, those are also always available on live streaming on the town's website.
Yeah. I mean, I encourage anyone to probably go to the meeting.
I think you learn a lot by going to the meeting.
It's a different feel.
One of the big challenges that we have is, and I'll admit, until I was a commissioner, I didn't really understand the process completely. But there are certain times where the public is allowed to speak, and then there are certain times where you have to have an expert testifying on your behalf. It all has to do with whether it's a legislative hearing or a quasi-judicial hearing. And understanding the process is very important as people either agree with or oppose upcoming development. The worst thing you can do, if you want to oppose something, the worst thing you can do is to send a scathing email to all the commissioners and call us idiots, basically.
Well,
When that happens, we just delete those. If somebody's got a solid argument and can present facts, that's great. But you don't just say, I don't want this. I'll give you an example. I've got a lady that I was talking to the other day. She said, we need to stop building everything in Wake Forest. We need to build the roads before anything else comes. And I said, well, do you understand that your taxes would quadruple if we were going to do that and widen all of these roads and build them before we even started? And she said, well, I don't want my taxes to go up. I said, well, okay, you got one or the other. You don't get to get both. And then the other thing she said is, we need to stop everybody from moving here. We don't need to put any more businesses or any more houses. The only thing we need is a Trader Joe's. Well, in order for Trader Joe's to come to town, one of their requirements is that you have 75,000 residents in the town. Well, we've said we've got 43,000. So you'd almost be doubling the number of residents in order to get a Trader Joe's here. So I think people need to understand the process and understand the rules and regulations. And then there are also times where if a property is zoned for something and the utilization of that property is as it's already zoned, then they don't have to come in front of the actual Board of Commissioners. They merely have to go past the design review board in order to build that location. So I think it's good for people to understand, and I think it's quite smart of people to educate themselves on the process and attend those meetings. And if not attend, at least watch them. At least watch the agenda to see if there's something that interests you that you would either be passionately for or against, and come and express your opinions. And we encourage you to send email. You can always send me an email if it's a town issue. You can send it to bpate@wakeforestnc.gov. Remember that whatever you send me to that address, though, is public record, and it will be subject to public receipt if anybody ever wanted to look at it. So, and I do not discuss Town of Wake Forest stuff on my real estate email because that could be subpoenaed into cases also if it were ever needed. So, but if you ever want to talk about those, I'm always happy to do so. My office is downtown. Happy to set up an appointment with you. We can meet at a coffee shop, or we can meet for a bite of pizza at Pizza Amore or La Foresta, or a cup of coffee over at Wake Forest Coffee Company, or we can meet for a piece of candy over at Sweetie's Candy Shop. I'd be happy to do any of those, but people are welcome to contact me and set up a time to meet with me.
Yep. I was just going to say it's better to go to the meetings instead of sound off on the Wake Forest Community Information page.
Yeah, yelling about things and complaining about things on the Wake Forest Community Information piece, if you really want to have your voice heard, that's the wrong place to do it.
Yeah.
I'll admit I go on it occasionally, but very rarely. Sometimes people will tag me on things there, and I'll go read through a few of the comments. But one thing I have noticed is that a lot of the people that are complaining don't even live in the town of Wake Forest, and I represent the citizens of Wake Forest. And I find it interesting that people that live in Wakefield complain because they don't get to vote on anything in Wake Forest. Well, you chose to live in Raleigh. That was your choice.
Yeah.
And you have control of what goes on in Raleigh. And I'm not even going to bring up the old arguments because there was a time when Wakefield was first developed. To be honest with you, it should have been part of Wake Forest, and there were some errors and mistakes made along the way that probably could have put the Wakefield area into the town of Wake Forest, but that's a discussion that's been long burned up over 20 years ago at this point.
Yeah.
So we get to talk football now?
Yeah, sports. So, Brian, who would win between the Wake Forest Cougars and the Wake Forest Demon Deacons?
Oh, that's a great question. Wow, I hadn't thought about that when you caught me off guard. So the Wake Forest Cougars against the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. I'm still going to have to say that the Demon Deacons would probably win that. I just think that when you look at the Division I athletes, and of course we've been very fortunate over the last couple of years to watch the athletes. I think we talked about it on our last podcast, or you and I have talked about it. I was talking about it multiple times, but if you look at the draft prospects for the 2019 NFL draft, of the top 5 ranked on Mel Kiper, who is like the guru for ESPN of the NFL draft, Dexter Lawrence is up there, who was a defensive end at Wake Forest, who now plays at Clemson. And then, of course, Bryce Love, who was the running back at
Stanford,
Wake Forest, and went to school at Stanford and finished second, if I remember correctly, in the Heisman Trophy balloting last year.
Yes.
Personally, even as a guy that went to school at the University of Oklahoma, I thought Bryce Love should have gotten it over Baker Mayfield, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But I think Bryce is probably a leading candidate for the Heisman Trophy, and that would be really cool for the town.
Yeah.
But probably the most impressive thing about Bryce Love, a CBS sports writer a couple of weeks ago during the Pac-12 conference preseason meetings, I guess it is, with the coaches and the players. They always go on some type of retreat with all of the media that covers the conference, and they bring in a player and a coach from the schools to do interviews. And a CBS reporter just absolutely skewered Bryce Love because he chose to go to class that day, or go to take a test, or he had something like that was an academic responsibility. And Bryce, doing the right thing, made the decision to go to that. And the reporter skewered him. And I made a comment on Twitter on it, and I thought it was just, very, very rarely do I go off on somebody for something like that, because people have their right to say what they want. But I thought it was irresponsible of a collegiate athletics reporter to not remember that they are students before they are athletes. And Bryce Love, as good of a football player as Bryce Love is, his long-term future is going to be based off of his education. He's a bright young man. He's very smart. And if you've ever met him, he's just a pleasure to be around. And I thought it was way out of line that guy mentioned that. But
yeah,
I would tell you, if you go back and look at it, and you look at the rosters and everything, and I've watched the replay of the Wake Forest games for the past 2 weeks, I think definitely the Deacon Demons would win that, and I would be willing to bet that they'd probably win it going away, just because if you think about it, the college athletes are some of the best from around the area combined, and Wake Forest, of course, is only drawing from a small area for their student athletes. So I know that some Wake Forest high school fans will be upset with that, but I think they'll also be rational enough to
It was a facetious
understand.
question.
Yes,
Yeah,
understood.
yeah.
Understood. But don't get me wrong. There will be some people in this town that would argue with you that Wake Forest High School would beat the Miami Dolphins. So we all have our passions, and but we also have to be realistic if we actually analyze it.
Well, let's talk about Wake Forest.
Sure.
Because it would appear that they have not lost a step at all.
Yeah, the only thing that I see at Wake Forest, and based on what I've seen, the quarterback this year throws a little bit more of a lob ball than the frozen rope, if you will, that the previous quarterback
Chris
did.
James.
Chris James. And their new wide receiver,
Trayvon Kenyon. He transferred from Monroe High School.
Trayvon Kenyon. And
he's committed to South Carolina.
Committed to the University of South Carolina, so he's going to be a Gamecock. He's looked good
He's a
the
monster.
2 games that I've seen. I don't think he's settled into that offense because it's a very run-heavy offense. Wake Forest is their bread and butter is that triple option, and they're going to continue to run that with the wing T. And
they've adapted him really well so far. I mean, I don't think they've ever really had a player like that, a 6'4", 225-pound receiver, something like that. And if you watch the Richmond game, they actually gave him like an end-around handoff, and he ran it like 50 yards up the field. They're using him in a lot of different ways, and he's a monster. He totally changed the landscape of that team as soon as he started.
I agree. I think the knock on Wake Forest for years, I think it's very interesting because for the last 5 or 6 years in both the Cap 8 and the NAC 6 conference, all of the other teams have been working on their run defense and to try to stop Wake Forest. They've been focused on that triple option because for a time when we were in the Cap 8, you had Enloe that ran the wing T as well as Wake Forest.
Well, you also had Braxton Berrios back in the day.
You had Braxton Berrios back in Leesville, and then you
Millbrook
had
you
had Millbrook with the Marshall boys,
Yep.
and then you had Wakefield put out some great football teams back in the day. But what was interesting that I've noticed in watching the highlights, unfortunately only highlights from some games and full games in some situation, and I've definitely noticed this with Heritage, is the defensive backs are being beaten many times over the top rather than on these undercutting. The area used to concentrate on a more West Coast style of offense where the slot receiver was getting most of the touches because they were running the shorter routes.
Yeah.
And now it seems like there are a lot more fly routes in the Heritage versus Middle Creek game. Of course, all disclosures here, I am the PA announcer for Heritage football, but I noticed that we had quite a few plays where we went deep. There was one to Christian Staracina that went down the left side. Of course, Joshua Crabtree, who probably will be recruited by Coach Brill because there were a couple of jump balls that he came down with the other night, including a long touchdown pass to the front left pylon. And then you had Whit Kane going deep on another play. So you've got a lot of players, you've got a lot of teams going over the top. Because what you typically do and what has, this may be a 90s way of thinking, but back in the day, we used to say you take your best athlete and you put him either at quarterback or you put him at running back, and you see what they can do for you. You give them the opportunity to make plays, and you do that. But I think some teams are using their skill position players in different ways these days, and it's interesting to see the coaching philosophies come out with that. Of course, where Wake Forest continues to dominate, and I do think they are the class of the NAC 6 right now.
They're the class of the eastern part of the state.
Yeah, I think they proved on Friday that even Richmond County coming up here, who's probably one of your competitors for the best on the east side.
Richmond County is a very good team, and Wake Forest just made toast
Richmond
of them.
County has 7 state championships, and Wake Forest had 2. So, almost a decade worth of state championships on the field.
Yeah.
And the quarterback for Richmond County is no slouch.
He's outstanding.
He's an A-League player.
He's only a sophomore.
He's only a sophomore, and you're going to see he's probably going to end up with 30 to 35 D1 offers.
Yeah.
But the one thing that got my attention, I don't remember the last time I saw a Wake Forest high school team give up 28 points. And that's my only question. And I did not watch enough of the defensive side of the ball to see what happened there. But that's certainly going to be what I want to see. And I think that I think that they've come back and they've got a couple of position players, but when you lose D1 talent like they've lost the last 2 to 3 years in a row, there's bound to be a drop off eventually. But what Wake Forest does better than anybody else is they have size. I remember having a conversation. Kip Abshire, who by the way, Kip Abshire was the PA announcer for Wake Forest High School for 16 years. Mm-hmm. He and I are friends. We've always ribbed each other and given each other a hard time. But Kip, I always would joke with Kip, and I'd say, "What are you guys feeding these guys at the pregame meal? Are you feeding them Miracle Grow?" Because they're so big.
It's amazing.
They've got a great weight training program that they do, and I don't know exactly what they're doing, but they've got the kids dedicated to the weight training, And that's what's making them so big. It's truly a difference that you can see on the field.
They consistently have the biggest offensive line.
No question. Even last year, after graduating all five, they graduated the entire offensive line last year. So all of the starters last year were seniors, and there were a lot of. It's funny because there were a lot of Wake Forest fans last year that were complaining that say, well, even when we're up 50-0 and it's a running clock, the starters are still in there. Well, obviously Reggie knows what he's doing. The man's got a line of success behind him, and whether you love him, hate him, or whatever, you got to recognize that he's a good football coach and has definitely built a powerhouse over there. And then on the other side of town, you got Heritage with a brand new head coach, but Coach Clark is by far he is far from inexperienced as the defensive coordinator, and that was a tough game to watch.
Heritage
on
is
Friday.
interesting. They looked like. Offensively speaking, they look like two different teams between week 1 and week 2.
Well,
week 1 they had 275 rushing yards. Week 2 they had 9.
Well, and I'll be honest with you, a lot of that was because of Panther Creek. Panther Creek was just unimpressive. So I would not use the Panther Creek game to judge Heritage. And if you watch the Heritage game closely, yes, they came out of the gate slow, and then you had the people I've talked with are just calling it the drive. Middle Creek was going down the field, and 3 third downs in a row, Heritage had a pass interference call to give Middle Creek a first down. Now, 2 of them were deserved. 1 of them was questionable, in my opinion, but 2 of them were deserved. And in addition to that, on that single drive, you had another offsides call against Heritage. So 4 penalties, and ended up putting in, I think the drive ended up being about a 16-play drive for 70, 75 yards, and it ended with a Middle Creek touchdown to put them up 14-0. And at that point, Middle Creek controlled the momentum. You could hear the air come out of the stands when the ball went into the end zone that time. And then they added another touchdown with about 3 or 4 minutes to go, and then they got the ball back with about a minute left in the half, and they just sat on the ball and took a knee because they knew they were getting the ball back on the opening drive. Well, I don't know at that point, there were a lot of people that were talking about leaving the game early, and this is why you never leave a football game early. I don't care what level it is. But something happened at halftime. I would love to have a recording of what Coach Clark said because I could use it every Monday morning before I go to work. But Heritage came back, scored 24 unanswered points, and probably a significant player on that. I've told a couple of people that my MVP would have been Ben Steele, who was the kicker for Heritage. Ben had 4 touchbacks on kickoffs, and then he had a 42-yard field goal to put Heritage up. I think it was either late in the third quarter or early in the fourth quarter.
It was with 7 minutes to go in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, and then Anthony Robinson, I think was his name, the running back for Middle Creek.
Yep.
Great running back. Bounces off runs, got some speed. He's a gazelle in the open field, and Heritage had maintained him for the most part for the evening. But when he broke away for that final touchdown with about 4.5, 5 minutes left, you kind of got a feeling that was the end of the comeback. And Heritage looked a little bit winded in the later part of the fourth quarter, and I'm not sure whether that was emotional or actual physical. But they had definitely expended a lot of energy in the first 18 minutes of the second half.
Yeah. So, I mean,
overall, this is my opinion. Overall, Heritage is the better football team between Middle Creek and Heritage, and I think that had Heritage been able to stop that drive that put Middle Creek up 14-0, I don't think it would have gotten as out of hand as it did in the first half.
I still expect obviously Wake Forest to be 1, Heritage to be 2 in the next 6, but
I think we got to watch Nightdale.
I think not Nightdale. I think we have to watch Rollsville. Okay. So, for those of you who know, Cleveland absolutely destroyed Garner last week, 43-6.
I was surprised at that one.
Week 1, Rollsville only lost to them 33-23, and then week 2, Rollsville took Clayton to the brink, and they lost 34-30. But those are 2 very good teams that they played with neck and neck.
Yeah.
And not many people expected Rollsville to be
I think Rolesville's biggest challenge is depth. I think their starters can compete with most teams in the conference. I think it's when they get to that second level and that junior or sophomore comes in behind a senior at some of the key positions that they're going to have trouble with. And Wakefield won. Wakefield beat Millbrook, and I'm looking forward to going to the Millbrook game. I've never been to a football game at Millbrook.
Yes, Heritage plays Millbrook
So
on Friday.
Heritage plays Millbrook this coming Friday.
And Wake Forest will go to Middle Creek on Friday.
Correct. Wake Forest, Middle Creek. So we'll finally have a common opponent between the two to compare.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, I'd be shocked if there wasn't a running clock in the fourth quarter with Wake Forest going to Middle Creek. I think Wake Forest is far outclassing Middle Creek, although at home that will be an electric atmosphere because Middle Creek has been frustrated by Wake Forest over the last few years, and I think Wake Forest has a 34 or 35 game winning streak now.
It's 33
that they're going to
34?
take into that one. So I think
It's a lot.
I think it'll be close in the first quarter, but I think Wake Forest pulls away in the second quarter, and I think they dominate the second half. So I think that's an easy one.
And back to Heritage, they should be able to pick up probably at least 3 wins before conference season starts.
Oh,
So
no doubt. Well,
there's no question they're going to be a playoff
They're
team.
going to beat Millbrook with no difficulty. Heritage, I think Wakefield and Heritage and Wake Forest will both make the state playoffs.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any question that that's the top 2 teams in the NAC 6. And of course, some will call me a Heritage homer. There will be some Wakefield folks and Rolesville folks that say, "What about us?" But I just haven't seen them play enough to be able to say there's no reason to believe that they would have come up that far in just a year. And Heritage has not dropped off that far. Heritage has a big offensive line. Zane Gilbert is a man among men. He's a big fella down there.
And they still have this guy, Drake Thomas, who had 16 tackles.
They
against
still
Middle
have
Creek.
Drake Thomas, and the key is the cornerbacks for Heritage are going to have to stop getting beat deep because they have been vulnerable to the pass. They bite on, and it's not because they're slow. It's because they're biting on a play action fake or something like that that's pausing them for a second, and their receivers are getting behind them. You cannot let the receiver behind you.
Yeah.
And you have to turn around and face the ball when it's being thrown. You can't face guard a receiver anymore. That's a personal foul.
Yeah. And it seems like the deep ball has been their weakness.
Yeah, no doubt. If Heritage had not given up the big play, you'd see significantly fewer points against on the board.
So let's go from talking about the current high school guys to some former guys.
Okay,
So this week obviously is the first real week of college football coming up,
it is.
and we have a lot of guys in ACC, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So one game is obviously James Madison, NC State.
Mm-hmm.
Heritage has Ricky Person, Thayer Thomas, Joseph Boltapelli there.
Yep.
I'm not sure exactly how much.
I don't know that Joseph will get any playing time because the defensive line is so stacked at NC State. But I think Ricky's probably going to get a look or two, unless they change their mind and decide to redshirt him. And I don't know what they're doing.
I don't know why.
Thayer Thomas.
He's going to be the starting punt returner, I think.
That would not surprise me at all. And then Thayer Thomas is a kid. Thayer Thomas may be one of my top 2 or 3 favorite athletes ever to come out of Heritage High School. This kid works and works and works. He's in 3 sports. He played basketball, baseball, and football for Heritage. He was a wide receiver for the Huskies football team. He's a wide receiver at NC State. And since he left Heritage, he's put on 20 pounds. And they showed, NC State tweeted the photograph. The football team tweeted the photograph of Thayer when he first got to NC State and now. And the kid has put on 20 pounds of solid muscle, and his speed is even faster than it was when he was at Heritage. And I think he was probably running a 4.4, 4.5 at Heritage. He's got some speed. And I think Thayer gets some playing time, especially in a 3 to 5 receiver set. I don't think there's any way that you can leave somebody that smart off the field. So I think NC State will use him this year.
He probably runs somewhere around a 4.5, 4.6 now.
Does he? So he's a little bit slower?
I don't think he ran a 4.4 at Heritage.
I thought he was faster than that at Heritage. He may not have been.
No, I like
Thayer
Thayer a lot, but 4.4 is pretty fast.
Okay, well, Thayer, you need to start working on it. Get me to a 4.4 so I can make Joel go away. But I think that Thayer is probably the best all around athlete that I've seen come out. Ricky, of course, great runner, played at Franklinton and then transferred to Heritage for his junior year. Had the injuries his junior year. He had a leg injury and then a wrist injury, and
But then the
just
senior
had a
year,
hard time.
you saw him unleashed.
Yeah, senior year he was definitely the class of the field, and I think probably would have given the guys over at Wake Forest a run for their money, with Dexter with Devin Lawrence and those guys.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it'll be fun to watch. I'm actually going on September 8th. I'm going to the Appalachian State versus UNC Charlotte, and we've got a couple of former Heritage players playing in Charlotte. And then you've got Gershom Ajoni that's playing up at Richmond.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, you've got Garrett Hudson, who played for Heritage High. That's
He's with the Redskins
He's
now.
with the Washington Redskins now. First Heritage player to actually sign an NFL agreement. Yeah. So you've got that going on. Joe Kane is up at Virginia Tech.
And
although I think that he will probably be redshirted this year, would be my guess.
Yeah. And some Wake Forest guys played for UNC. They had Zach Gill on the line, and Devin Lawrence we just mentioned.
Yeah, Zach Gill. Zach Gill's probably one of my favorite Wake Forest guys that come out. He's another one of those workhorses, always in the middle of it. Got there early to practice, hit the weight room early, stayed late, that kind of thing. Another solid person in addition to being a good football player.
UNC will travel to California, 4:00 on Saturday.
Playing Cal, so traveling across the country to play. That may wear on them. I think Carolina's going to have a hard time early in the season. Of course, they got a bunch of players suspended for just doing stupid things.
Yeah.
I still don't understand football players. You know, I'm a Florida State and Oklahoma fan. I still don't understand football players making bad decisions when they've got the world as their oyster.
Yeah.
It's just an opportunity there to do something great, and they just blow it.
A day before, Army will take on Duke. Gunnar Holmberg is on the Duke roster. I don't think he's really going to play much this year.
I don't think he's going to see the field. I think he's going to be learned. Duke's got a very good starting quarterback, and I think that he's probably going to see the field most of the time.
I think Gunner's their long term.
I think Gunner is the long-term solution in 2 more years, and I think if they redshirt him, then they'll be able to get if he comes on the field as a redshirt freshman, as a redshirt sophomore, he likely starts, and if he continues to progress, as most players do in that program under Coach Cutcliffe, he'll probably be the starter his junior and senior years.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, and you are going to the Virginia Tech at Florida State game.
I am. I'm driving down to Virginia Tech or to Tallahassee on Saturday. One of buddy of mine that used to go to school with my daughter and then worked for me at the DJ company years ago. Some of you Wake Forest folks may remember him, Chaska Moon. Chaska was the long snapper for the Wake Forest high school football team. Went to school at Virginia Tech as a walk-on and was on the ball club his freshman and sophomore years. He's since decided to focus on his studies in aeronautical engineering. Chaska is coming down, and I went up to Virginia Tech a few years ago. He invited me to a game, and while I was there, I told him the next time Virginia Tech played Florida State in Tallahassee, I would take him. And so we're going to drive down on Saturday, go to the game Monday night, and then hightail it back on Tuesday because I've got a planning board meeting on Tuesday night at 7:30, and he's got to get back to school so that he only misses Tuesday for classes. But Virginia Tech ranked 17th in the country. Florida State ranked 19th. I think
Virginia Tech
correct.
is number 20.
Well, it depends on which poll you look at, but it's first game of the Willie Taggart era for Florida State, and of course you've seen if you watch college football closely, you've heard that there's quite the controversy from Florida State's old coach Jimbo Fisher over at Texas A&M with a former player that has accused them of practicing outside the legal allowable times from the NCAA and requiring players to do what are called OTAs, optional team activities, and that it was more required, and there aren't supposed to be any coaches at those types of things, and there were, and it basically turned into a practice, and then they were practicing too long. If all of that comes to light and it's true, then you're certainly going to have some issues there, which being an FSU fan, I would not have a problem with. But anyway, But FSU, lots of excitement around that. Still questions as to whether James Blackman or DeAndre Francois will be the starting quarterback.
Yep.
Nooney Murray is somebody who's going to get a lot of attention this year at wide receiver for the Seminoles, and then Cam Akers is in my opinion is going to be the featured back. But Florida State's got 5 running backs that they'll rotate in and out. But Akers will be your workhorse. He reminds me a lot of Dalvin Cook. A lot more escapability, if you will. But I would expect number 3, Cam Akers, to be big timer this year. On the defensive side, there's only one number you need to remember, and that's number 90. His name is DeMarcus Christmas, and he is a load, an awesome defensive end. Brian Burns on the other side, I think the between the two of them, they're going to make some quarterbacks' lives miserable. So if you think you're going to block man-to-man against FSU, that's certainly not going to happen. So that's where I go on Labor Day. And then
Yes.
The next 4 weeks, I'll be following Appalachian State. For those of you that don't know, my wife is an Appalachian State grad, and my daughter plays piccolo in the Appalachian Band, so we go up there every weekend. We've got our season tickets there. And then my favorite one that I'm looking forward to for the season is on Saturday, October 6th, the Red River rivalry between Oklahoma and Texas. I refer to it as the Oklahoma-Texas game. One of my old friends, Chris McKay, who's a Texas fan, always corrects me and tells me it's Texas-Oklahoma, but he can't help it if he's wrong all the time. But Oklahoma is under the second year under Lincoln Riley, who used to be the coach at East Carolina, and it'll be anxious to see what he does. This is the second year he's been there, and he's had now 2 recruiting classes, and that's when you begin to see what a coach's philosophy is. And Oklahoma, of course, ranked in the top 10 in most of the preseason polls, and it'll be interesting to see if they can hold on to that. I do know that there are lots of renovations to the stadium out there. I went out there on a trip at the end of July. Their new club level is absolutely gorgeous, and we had a good time touring the stadium and seeing a bunch of old friends.
Yeah, I'm just looking at this week 1 schedule. I just can't wait. Some of these games I'm looking forward to a lot. Like Washington, Auburn.
Yep.
That's
Well,
good.
there are teams are realizing that they can't play Sisters of the Poor University the first couple of games and maintain their position.
It's becoming more like basketball, where they need to have a good schedule to be considered for the.
Well, if you think you've got a playoff shot, you want to play those good
Yeah.
teams, because that happened to Florida State a couple of years ago against Oregon. They went through what I considered to be a fairly light schedule, other than Clemson and the Gators, and then just got run off the field in the last game that Jameis Winston played for FSU on his sophomore year. So that was January of 2014, I guess it was. So I think coaches are realizing. I think we're seeing a new era of coaching start to come in. We're at some point Nick Saban's going to hang it up, because he's getting into his late 60s.
Yeah.
And when Saban hangs his headset up, I think you're going to see a lot of different movement in college football with regard to the coaching. I think it's a different world. We've seen a big example with Urban Meyer this week, and the disclosure of different items with getting people into trouble. I think Coach Meyer, he's been suspended for the first 3 games. The Ohio State administration getting some heat from people outside of it, saying, okay, Ohio State did an internal investigation on Ohio State football and decided not to destroy Ohio State football for the next 20 years. I think that may come back to haunt them. I think universities are having a very difficult time in balancing a solid football or basketball or whatever athletics program along with the social challenges of the day. You've seen the Silent Sam thing going on over at UNC and things like that. So there's a lot that administrations have to worry about, and of course, in this society, everybody gets offended at something. So even if you do the right thing, somebody's going to be mad. I remember reading about John McCain's death last night, and someone posted, well, hey, he did I made a comment about him doing the right thing or what he believed to be right, and somebody immediately jumped into the Obamacare argument. People just jump to ridiculous levels of stupidity so quickly these days, and it's very frustrating. But it's also very difficult for an administration to walk that line between angering people and doing disciplinary action, but also being fair to the student athlete. I don't think you can kick a player off because he makes a mistake. I think everybody should get the right to a second chance. And that the university should be there to help them. But if the kid continues to make poor decisions, then you can, of course, separate your relationship and terminate it at that point.
Yeah. So do you want to make some quick picks, or I know you have something real estate to talk about?
I just wanted to talk about the real estate market for a quick sec.
We're at 54 minutes right now.
Oh goodness, I didn't realize we'd been talking that long.
Yeah.
So we'll do this real quick for the town of Wake Forest real estate market. You've got you're seeing in terms of the increase in inventory that we're seeing nationally. You're seeing that here locally. You're beginning to see sellers dropping their prices. There's been a whole bunch of price drops over the last couple of weeks, and we expect to continue to see that. So that's about all for the real estate update. It's pretty much continuing what we said it was going to happen, and we expect to continue to see in the month of September the inventory rise and prices become a little bit more flat.
Mm-hmm. And last thing I have to talk about is this is the first week of school, right?
It is.
So everyone's back in school now.
High school students, traditional students, all go back to school tomorrow on Monday. So watch out. There'll be a lot more school buses. Make sure you plan a little extra time to get to wherever you're going.
It'll be a lot nicer in the middle of the day with less high school students driving around.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Keep them in the school.
Yeah, but they all get out on the road at the same time, and then they all a lot of them escape for lunch and make the lunchtime crowd a little bit bigger. So that's okay.
Yeah. So
It's okay.
from us here, just good luck in the new school year.
Absolutely.
Especially to the teachers.
Keep your grades up. Yeah, there was a cartoon that a friend of mine sent me, and it had a picture of a husband trying to talk his wife out of the bathroom. She had locked the door, and she says, "I don't want to go back there. The kids don't like me." And he says, "I know, honey, but you're a teacher. You have to go." So I know teachers have been working hard to get prepared, and we thank them for their job. I know that my favorite teacher in high school was a lady named Mildred Shuford, and Miss Shuford was one of my favorite people ever for me to run across, and I'll probably talk about her in a later broadcast.
Yep. So kids, take advantage of your opportunities. Teachers, have patience with the kids.
Yep.
And parents,
if you feel like killing your children this week, remember nobody looks good in orange.
Yeah, I mean this is also it's also a great week for parents getting rid of the kids finally.
It is, but it's also very stressful. We think we want them out of our lives and have more free time, but you certainly miss them while they're gone, that's for sure. And for those parents that sent your kids off to their freshman year in college last year, it gets better, trust me. I missed Shannon for a good month and a half last year, and finally got settled and the relationship became even better. So just keep digging in. Make sure you just keep communicating with your kids.
Yeah, I think a lot of people say that it's harder for parents to give up, to let go of the kid than it is for the kid to let go of the parents.
Because the kid's been waiting on this opportunity for years, and the parents been dreading it.
Yep.
So absolutely.
Well, that's all I have.
All right,
Unless you have
sounds
anything
good.
else. Thank you.
Have a great week.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Absolutely.
It's an hour-long podcast.
Really? We went a whole hour?
Well, it's 50,
just shy?
It's 57 minutes, but we're going to have the intro. It's like another 20 seconds.
We better
and then-
sign off then so it doesn't get to an hour or nobody will watch it.
That's true.
Or listen. I guess you can't watch a podcast. So.
If you have any ideas of things that we can talk about, we're going to record again next week when I'm back. So just hit Brian up on Facebook or Twitter.
Yep. Hit me at Twitter at DJ Brian Pate, on Instagram at BP8 Realty. Mm-hmm. Or you can always send me an email to brian@paterealty.com. Let us know what you want to hear us talking about here in the town of Wake Forest.
Yes. Please share the podcast and subscribe on iTunes. We're going to have the iTunes link out there on Facebook and Twitter, so it'll be easy to click it and follow it.
There you go.
And for everything else, go to paterealty.com.
Exactly. And happy Labor Day. Drive safely if you're traveling.
Yes, happy Labor Day.
In the words of my great-grandfather, Pappy Jack, keep your tires between the ditches and the bears out of your britches. There you go.
That's a great way to end it. I can't. All right. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.